This is Dr. Weisslugel. Today I want to take you through a few slides to discuss the ideas on religion and morality and the relationship between them as understood by some key 19th century thinkers, Ludwig Feuerbach, Karl Marx, and Friedrich Nietzsche. Uh, Before we begin that discussion of their ideas specifically, I just want to remind you or tell you something about the difference between philosophical idealism and philosophical materialism. Now, those words idealism and materialism show up in our everyday language quite frequently. If you mean by idealism sort of an optimism about the future and progress and a willingness to be concerned and help others, well, then I hope we will all be a little bit idealistic. Uh, in the ordinary sense of materialism, if by that you mean shop till you drop, he who dies with the most toys wins, the only thing that matters is the stuff that you have. Well, in that sense, I hope none of us will be materialists. But idealism and materialism, especially in the 19th century, have some very specific philosophical concepts attached to them. Feuerbach, Marx, and Nietzsche were students of perhaps the greatest idealist philosopher, uh, Georg Hegel. Hegel lived between 1770 and 1831. Uh, he's best known for an idealism and to simplify a very subtle and sophisticated complex philosophy. Idealism says that what is real is the idea. The idea. Ideas are real. And for Hegel, he had an understanding of something that he would call the absolute idea. In other words, reality is an idea, almost you could think of it as the mind of God, working itself out in history over time, so that everything that happens at the moment, the good and the bad, are in attention and are, as he would say, dialectically, logically working themselves out to a point in the future where everything resolves itself and all tensions, all conflicts are uh, finished. Uh, that was an idea that was very influential on Karl Marx in specifically, but we'll see how he revised that idea in a very important way. But what I want you to catch here is that in idealism, if you change the idea, if the idea or the mind changes, reality will change. Ideas drive reality. In materialism, it's just the opposite. What is real is matter or our material conditions. So if you change our material conditions, you change the way we physically, materially operate in the world, our ideas will begin to change. So in a way, it's a philosophical chicken and egg question. Which comes first? Is it the ideas that create the reality, or is it a material reality that generate our ideas? And that's a tension that we'll see as we look at these three thinkers. Now, I've simplified. So much more needs to be said and probably corrected in what I just said right there, but just get the gist of that difference between idealism and materialism. Okay, so first up, Ludwig Feuerbach. Feuerbach wrote an influential book called The Essence of Christianity, and his idea was that the highest human ideals were projected away from humans, in other words, alienated from human beings, onto, in Feuerbach's mind, a non existent God, an entity kind of over there. And all of our highest ideals, our great ideals, our noble ideals, are kind of stripped away from ourselves and placed on an entity that's up ahead in the future, up in heaven. And Feuerbach thought that only by overcoming this alienation would we be able to recapture our own noble ideals. Don't project them out onto something else, but to keep them for ourselves and live according to them ourselves. And an example he gives is the distinction or the difference between the Holy Family, which he's thinking about Christianity, that's you know Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, versus any old earthly families, particularly a working class earthly family. He says if you look at the Holy Family, Joseph is a quiet, supportive, loving provider for his family, and Mary is a sacrificial mother who cares for her family, and Jesus is a filially loyal, obedient child, and they all love and care about each other in kind of a perfect world. Now, you compare that with the earthly working class family. Well, what's that all about? Well, mom's stuck at home doing drudge work, and the father goes off to the mill or the mine, and he slaves away for a meager salary, and he stops by the bar on the way home to kind of drown his sorrows, and by the time he gets home, he maybe beats his wife and beats his kid, and Feuerbach thought, well, if we could recapture our own most noble ideas and don't say, oh, well, we'll all get our reward up ahead, pie in the sky, by and by, uh, uh, we'll be better in this life if we could recapture those ideals. So in Feuerbach's mind, religion is a cause or a source of society's problems. We're taking what's best about us and throwing it over there on some non-existent God instead of keeping those ideals and living those ideals according to ourselves. So if we sort of were to recapture those ideals, our earthly life would be much better. Now, Karl Marx, who we'll talk about in a second, he said, well, Feuerbach claims to be a materialist. He says, oh, I don't want religion. Religion's idealistic, it's spiritualistic. I'm talking about the material world, this world. But Marx criticized him. He said, you know what? That sounds really like idealism. He called it crypto-idealism. If we change our ideas, we say, oh, our ideas don't land out there on some non-existent God. Our ideas are our own. If we just change those ideas, the material conditions, the miserable conditions of the working class will change. Marx says that's idealism. That's not real materialism. Religion, which is a set of ideas, Feuerbach says, is the cause or source of society's problems. Now, Marx, he wrote a little book, some theses on Feuerbach, and his most famous one is the 11th, where he said, the philosophers up to this point have only interpreted the world in various ways. Marx said very radically, the point is to change it. That was a call to action. And Marx thought just the opposite. He thought if you change the material conditions of that working class, all of our ideas will change along with it. He said that what we think and value is determined by the material or economic basis of society, the way society operates. And it operates in a certain way, and that generates certain ideas that we have. So for Marx, he didn't think religion was the cause of problems in society. He thought it was kind of a symptom of the problems in society. He thought it indicated some symptoms of the problems of society. And his idea is you got to change society, a real materialist philosophy Marx was offering. So, you might have heard of Karl Marx, and you might have understood that his name is most associated with socialism and communism, and you may have some awareness of the historically that communist societies have been very anti-religion, suppressed and oppressed religious people. But it's important to hear what Marx said about religion. You might think that Marx didn't like religion, or he thought there was something bad about religion, like Feuerbach did, like it was self-alienation. But let's listen to his own words. Marx wrote, religion is indeed the self-consciousness and self-esteem of man who has either not yet won through to himself or has already lost himself again. Right? We haven't become ourselves. We've lost ourselves. Man is no abstract being squatting outside the world. Man is the world of man, state and society. This state and this society produce religion, which is an inverted consciousness of the world because they are in an inverted world. Religion is the general theory of this current world. It's encyclopedic compendium. It's logic in popular form. It's spiritual point d'honneur. It's enthusiasm. It's moral sanction. It's solemn compliment. And it's universal basis of consolation and justification. It is the fantastic in the sense of fantasy. It is the fantastic realization of the human essence, since the human essence has not acquired any true reality, at least not yet. The struggle against religion is therefore indirectly the struggle against that world whose spiritual aroma is religion. Right? Religion is not the world, it's an aroma of a certain kind of world that there's a struggle against. Religious suffering is, at one and the same time, the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. It's a very famous line there. But opium is a medicine. There's a sickness in society, and it hurts, and it feels bad, and it produces pain and suffering. So we need some kind of medicine The medicine's not the problem. We take the medicine because we're sick. But what we need to do is not just treat the symptom of the disease, Marx says, we need to cure the disease. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is really the demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusion. What is that condition that requires illusions? It's capitalist society. It's unjust, unequal society. The criticism of religion is therefore in embryo the criticism of that veil of tears, which religion is the halo. Okay, so Marx is not, he doesn't think religion is the problem. He thinks if you fix society, you won't need the medicine anymore, and religion will go away. Feuerbach thought what you need to do in order to live well, to be the best you could be, is to get rid of religion. Start with that. Get rid of it and everything will be okay. Marx says, well, you won't get rid of it until you get rid of the disease that requires religion, at least in his mind. So here's kind of a picture of the way Marx understood society. The base is below the red line there. All societies have this base, all of them. There's natural resources. There's what we do with those natural resources. We make things. We make food, clothing, and all kinds of other stuff. And then there's some kind of means of distribution. So there are lots of different ways to produce what we have out of our natural resources. There's lots of different ways to distribute what's produced. Does everybody get the same thing? Do some people get more than other things? How are we going to distribute? There's plenty of ways to do that. And as those processes are developed, we talk about them, and we talk about them in the sense of we write laws that reinforce those processes, and we develop politics that embed those processes. And sort of riding on top of that are all of our philosophical ideas, our religious ideas, the kind of art we create, what counts as being a good person, a bad person, in other words, our morality, what things interest us in terms of science. So for Marx, the base is the key for everything. That's a very material understanding of where our ideas, like philosophy, science, morality, religion, art, they're generated out of the way we produce things and distribute things in society. So if you change the base, you will change the superstructure. Marx thought we were all alienated in a variety of ways. He thought we were alienated in the sense from what we make, from how we produce things in our current society. We do things like we work in assembly lines, we work in little office cubicles, and so forth, and we never really see the finished product. We just see the fragment, our little piece of the puzzle, so to speak. So we ourselves, he thinks, become fragmentary. And we labor, but the fruits of our labor become commodities bought and sold by other people. We don't work all day and then keep the fruit of our labor. And he says even sometimes we work on products that kill us. Somebody manufactures cigarettes, and some people manufacture things that poison the environment and so forth. So we're alienated from the products of our work. We're also, in a way, alienated from working. Human beings naturally desire to be creative, do things, we get bored, so we do stuff. But the way our society is ordered, we have to forego all that in order to labor for those who owns the means to productions. By means of production, we mean tools, factories, transports. We don't own any of that stuff. So if we want to work, we got to go use other people's tools, we got to go use other people's factory, and those other people get to keep the fruit of our labor. Humans are also alienated, we're alienated from ourselves. We sell ourselves. We sell ourselves cheap because we're in competition with each other. If there's one job and two of us, and I agree to work for less, well, that puts pressure on you, and maybe you'll work for even less, and then I might work for even less. So we're not in cooperation with each other, we're in competition. And so we're alienated from each other, but also from ourselves. We take ourselves and sell it to somebody else. We give over what's us to somebody else for at least 8 hours a day, and oftentimes a lot more. And all that alienation is a function of the way we produce and distribute goods in our particular kind of economic system. And that alienation produces certain kind of struggles, pains, suffering, and religion is a balm. It's a palliative, it's a medicine, pain reliever for those kind of processes. Communism then is the solution, where we don't have that distinction between those who own the tools, the means to production, and those who have to produce and alienate themselves from themselves and each other and their work and their products. So the first stage of that for Marx was what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat. The proletariat are those who work and don't own the means of production. Then he thought, well, once that happened, where there weren't any owners and therefore there weren't any wage slaves, then the state would kind of just wither away. You wouldn't need the political legal system to back up capitalism because it wouldn't be capitalism anymore. But, if you study your history, you know that under Stalin in the former Soviet Union, the state not only did not wither away, but it became totalitarian. It's a danger. And for Marx, anyway, that would represent the end of history, not in the sense that nothing happens, but history, as his teacher Hegel taught him, and as he agreed, history in the sense of meaningful events that happen are all about trying to win this struggle between the haves and the have-nots to overcome injustice. And once it's overcome in a just economic system, Marx thought that would be the end of history. It wouldn't be the end of us, wouldn't be the end of doing things, but we would live in a more peaceful and just situation. So for Marx, again, religion is a pain reliever. It's not the problem. The problem is an unjust economic system. Okay, so our third great thinker of the 19th century is Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche wrote a whole shelf load of books. Here's a list of some of them, but I direct your attention down towards the middle there, where he talks about, writes books about beyond good and evil. What would that mean? We talk about the distinction between good and evil, but what would be beyond it? And then he writes a book on the genealogy of morals. Now, what's a genealogy? It's a family tree. Philosophers that we've looked at in this course, Plato, Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas, they thought morality was always and everywhere ultimately the same. What was good was always good. What was bad or evil was always bad or evil. But Marx thought, just like you and I, he thought moralities have family trees. Like our family tree. If our great-grandparents hadn't gotten together, we wouldn't have parents and we wouldn't be us. But those things didn't have to happen that way. Let's say my great-grandparents met over coffee one time, but let's suppose, on the way there, one of them got hit by a bus. Okay, they would have never met, they would have never married, they would have never produced one of my parents, and I wouldn't be here. It's contingent how things turned out. So Nietzsche wants to look at morality and say, hey, it didn't drop from the sky fully formed. It's not a function of Platonic ideas or a built-in God-designed human nature. It has a history. Could have been otherwise. Could have been different. And then, he launches his attack on Christianity. He writes a book called The Antichrist and Ecce Homo, which is sort of a philosophical, biographical set of reflections, and then a last book, which wasn't really a book. He just was pulled together later, some writings of his that we now call the Will to Power. These are powerful books. He was a fantastic writer, brilliant writer, and very provocative, very controversial. So he's the guy who famously said, God is dead. So let's take a look at the text where he famously said this. And he doesn't write like other philosophers. He writes in a very prophetic or almost mythological, literary kind of style. So here's Nietzsche. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours? Now think about it. That would be mad, right? Why turn on the light in the middle of the day? He ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I am looking for God. I am looking for God. And many of those who did not believe in God were standing together there. He caused considerable laughter. Have you lost him then? Said one. Did he lose his way like a child? Said another. Or is he hiding? Is he scared of us? Did he emigrate? They shouted and laughed in this manner. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his look. Where is God gone? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where is it moving now? Where are we moving now? Away from all suns? Aren't we perpetually falling backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Aren't we straying as though through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Hasn't it become colder? Isn't more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's putrefaction, his decay? Gods do decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, comfort ourselves? That which was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games will we need to invent? Isn't the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to seem worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever shall be born after us, for the sake of this deed he shall be part of a higher history than all the history that came before. Here the madman fell silent, and again regarded his listeners, and they too were silent, stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern to the ground, and it shattered and went out. I come too early, he said to them. My time hasn't yet come. This tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached human ears. Even lightning and thunder need time. Deeds need time after they have been done before they can be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet we have done it ourselves. Now, let me just go back to this earlier page and just talk about this a little bit. What is this powerful passage trying to say? What's this madman telling us? The madman's telling us an event happened, and he feels the profundity of this event. And he said that God is dead, and not only dead, but we've killed God. We've killed off God. Now, what does Nietzsche mean by God? He means, yeah, the God that you, for instance, might believe in and might pray to and have a relationship with. But he means God substitutes. Anything that acts as the sun, that lights our way, that shows us where everything is, anything that acts as a foundation, anything that acts as an anchor to keep us, online and understanding of our way, lets us know where we are, keeps us in a place that we understand. Anything that serves that purpose, Nietzsche said, through the history of our thought, has come to seem false. That in modern times, as you'll see in another presentation in this course, the modern times have wiped away that foundation, have wiped away that anchor. And that's what he means when he says God is dead. And we've done that, he says. And we're going to be in a position where we don't know what to do. Now, a lot of people don't realize that happened yet. We're still going through the process of figuring that out. The whole modern age can be characterized as a tension between religion and these old, as Nietzsche would call them, superstitions, and this sort of modern view that science shows us that all there is infinite matter. Well, Nietzsche says, well, everybody's, the cutting edge, the enlightened people, so to speak, are very, seem to be very satisfied with that thought. Oh, good, we don't need that old superstition anymore. We've got science, we've got technology, we've got gadgets. We're good. But Nietzsche says, you don't understand. You don't understand where that leaves us. He said, we almost have to become gods ourselves in order to have carried out this, at least intellectual or spiritual murder of God. And think about how we are these days, morally speaking. Think about our contemporary moral problems about cloning and genetic engineering and nanotechnology. Don't we say sometimes in the midst of our arguments about those moral issues, what are we going to do? Play God? Well, that's Nietzsche more than 100 years ago, anticipating this same situation that we're in now. Okay, so here's another quote from a different book. It's a book called The Gay Science, gay in the sense of joyful. He this is a little paragraph entitled "In the Horizon of the Infinite." So listen. We have left the land and have gone aboard ship. We have broken down the bridge behind us. Nay, more than that, we've broken down and gotten rid of the land behind us. Well, little ship, look out. Beside thee is the ocean. It is true it does not always roar, and sometimes it spreads out like silk and gold in a gentle reverie, a gentle dream, but times will come when thou wilt feel that it is infinite, and there is nothing more frightful than infinity. The poor bird that felt itself free and now strikes against the walls of this cage. Alas, if homesickness for the land should attack thee, as if there had been more freedom there, and there is no land any longer. Now think again about natural law that you've been looking at with Thomas Aquinas, and even going back to Aristotle, that this idea that we have a nature, that we're grounded, and that our nature tells us how it's best for us to be, if only we learn to read it properly, and that it's perhaps even been designed by an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God who has determined how it's best for us to be. Some people say, I want to get out from under that. I want to get out from under, say, religion, this idea that there's some kind of natural way for us to be. So we set sail, and we set sail in a way that we hope that there aren't any limits. And at first that feels great. Wow, the shackles are off. I have wide horizons in every direction. I can go where I want. I can do what I want. No one tells me what's right, what's wrong. But Nietzsche says the time comes when you feel that infinity, that lack of foundation, that lack of borders, that as a cage. In other words, a cage in which you don't know where you are. If you picture yourself, for instance, in a swimming pool, and I say, tell me where you are in the swimming pool. We've got a little radio control so we can talk to each other, and you'll say, oh, I could tell you exactly where I'm in the pool. I'm 5 feet from the deep end wall. I'm 15 feet from the shallow end wall. I'm 3 feet from the bottom and 4 feet from the surface. And I can find you exactly in that pool because I know where the boundaries are. It's a finite pool. So you know where you are, absolutely, in the pool. But now picture yourself, if you can, and it's hard to do it, picture yourself in an infinite pool where you never get to the surface, you never get to the sides, you never get to the bottom. There is no bottom, no top. And now try to tell me where you are. You have no reference points. You're lost. Right? No one's closer to the top or closer to the bottom. So in that sense, maybe we're all equal in this infinite pool. Nobody's in a better spot in the pool than somebody else, but we're all equally lost in that pool. And we don't know. If you apply this again to our moral thinking, well, where are the touchstones? Where are the points of reference so we know where we are and where we're headed and how it's best for us to be? Well, Nietzsche thinks if God is dead, and he thinks that because of modern science and advanced Enlightenment thinking, God effectively is dead, even though people still go to churches. He says they're just sort of whited sepulchres. In other words, they're just sort of tombstones, graveyards of God, but God's already dead. He said, well, effectively, where are our boundaries? Where are our touchstones, our roadmaps, our signposts? Now, in this environment that Nietzsche sees us living in, he talks about something he calls the last man, and he does not think the last man is very admirable or enviable. So here's Nietzsche again. Alas, there comes the time when man will no longer launch the arrow of his longing beyond man, and the string of his bow will have unlearned to whiz. I tell you, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. I tell you, you still have chaos in yourselves. Alas, there comes the time when man will no longer give birth to any star. Alas, there comes the time of the most despicable man, who can no longer even despise himself. Lo, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? So asked the last man, and he blinks. The earth has become small, and on it hops the last man, who makes everything small. His species is as ineradicable as the flea. The last man lives longest, right? What are we most interested in? Living forever, right? The Methuselah Society is out there. Aubrey de Grey is out there trying to treat death as a disease so that we could live forever and ever and ever and ever with our technology, maybe hooked to machines. Who cares what the quality of life is, as long as we live long? We have discovered happiness, say the last men, and they blink. They have left the regions where it is hard to live, for they need warmth. One still loves one's neighbor and rubs against him, for one needs warmth. In other words, we don't have any real relationships anymore, says Nietzsche. We just stick together just to keep warm. We don't really care about the other. Turning ill and being distrustful, they consider sinful. They walk warily. He is a fool who still stumbles over stones or men. A little poison now and then, that makes for pleasant dreams. And much poison at the end for a pleasant death. Right? We take our drugs, we take our drink, we hook up to the internet, we Twitter and tweet, Facebook and play Angry Birds. And then, at the end, maybe we just, call Dr. Kevorkian and end it in a very pleasant way. One still works, for one work is a pastime, but one is careful lest the pastime should hurt someone. No, we don't work for ourselves or for the beauty or value of it, but we got to do something. One no longer becomes poor or rich. Both are too burdensome. Who still wants to rule? Who still wants to obey? Both are burdensome. Who cares? Or as the kids like to say, whatever. No shepherd and one herd. Everyone wants the same. Everyone is the same. He who feels differently goes voluntarily into the madhouse. You don't want to stand out. We work hard not to stand out, don't we, sometimes? Formerly all the world was insane, say the subtlest of them, and they blink. They are clever and know all that has happened. Right? We have the internet. I know all that has happened. So there is no end to their derision. People still quarrel, but are soon reconciled. Otherwise, it upsets the stomach. Right? Why do we need to fight? Doctrine divides. Why can't we all get along? Said Rodney King. They have their little pleasures for the day, their little pleasures for the night, but they have a regard for health. We have invented happiness, say the last men, and they blink. Now, what's the alternative? Nietzsche says, I teach you the overman. Sometimes that's translated as Superman, but Superman's a comic book hero. Nietzsche means by Übermensch, the overman, the Superman, something else. I teach you the overman. Mankind is something to be overcome. In other words, the way we are now, we got to get past that. What have you done to overcome mankind? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. Do you want to be the ebb of that great tide, when it peters out, and revert back to the beast rather than overcome mankind? What is the ape to a man? A laughingstock and a thing of shame. We look down on apes. We say, well, they're less than us. And just so shall you and I, a man, be to the overman, a laughingstock and a thing of shame. You have evolved from worm to man, but much within you is still worm. Once you were apes, yet even now man is more of an ape than any of the apes. Even though, think about it. Who starts all these wars? Who's degrading the planet? Well, we human beings are doing that. And we say, oh, animals, boy, that person's just like an animal. Well, that should be a compliment compared to some things humans do. Even the wisest among you is only a confusion and a hybrid of plant and phantom. The vegetative functions and the rational functions, Aristotle would say. But do I ask you to become phantoms or plants? Behold, I teach you the overman. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. I beg you, my brothers, remain true to the earth, and believe not those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. In other words, like religion. Forget about religion. Think about this world, this earth, life. Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the overman. We are a transitional something, a rope over a great abyss, a great chasm. And it's a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, and a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing. Now, Nietzsche talks about the will to power. He says, mutually refraining from wounding each other, from violence, and from exploitation, and setting one's will on the same level as others. These can, in certain crude sense, become good habits among individuals, if conditions exist for that, namely, a real similarity in the quality of their power and their estimates of value, as well as their belonging together within a single body. Okay? So equals who are doing well, okay, they don't need to exploit each other necessarily. They don't need to wound each other necessarily because they're equals. However, as soon as people wanted to take this principle further and, where possible, establish it, this non-wounding, this non-violence, this non-exploitation, establish that as the basic principle of society, it immediately showed itself for what it is, as the willed denial of life, as the principle of disintegration and decay. Do you hear how radical he is? Non-violence, non-exploitation, that's a sign of disintegration and decay, he wants to say. Here we must think through the fundamentals and push away all sentimental weakness. Living itself is essentially appropriation from and wounding and overpowering strangers and weaker men, oppression, hardness, imposing one's own forms, annexing, and at the very least, in its mildest actions, exploitation. But why should we always use these precise words, which have from ancient times carried the stamp of slanderous purpose? Now, just catch this out. Life is about, ultimately, exploitation. So if you have a moral theory that says exploitation is bad, Nietzsche's going to say, well, that's life denying. That's a very radical sentiment and has not been shared by anybody else in the history of philosophy. He continues, even that body in which, as previously mentioned, the individuals deal with each other as equals, the superior people, he would say, is the aristocracy. Even there, it must itself, if it is a living body, this aristocracy, this superior people as a group, even if it remains a living body and not dying out, do to other bodies all those things which the individuals in it refrain from doing to each other. It will have to be the living will to power. It will grow, grab things around it, pull to itself, and want to acquire predominance. Not because of some morality or immorality, because it is alive, and because living is simply the will to power. That's the theory of life for Nietzsche, the will to power. To take, to exploit, to have, to control, to impose your will. But in no point is the common consciousness of the European, and America is European in this sense, more reluctant to be instructed than here. Nowadays, people everywhere, even those in scientific disguises, are raving about the coming conditions of society from which the exploitative character is to have disappeared. Now, we know who said that. Marx said that. Marx said it's a scientific inevitability that exploitation will one day be overcome by communism. Nietzsche, he says that's crazy talk. To my ears, that sounds as if people had promised to invent a life which abstained from all organic functions, like a non-living life, a dead life, Nietzsche says. The exploitation is not part of a depraved or incomplete or primitive capitalist society. It belongs in the essential nature of what is living as a basic organic function. It is a consequence of the real will to power, which is simply the will to live. Assuming that this is something new as a theory, it is nonetheless, in reality, the fundamental fact of all history. We should at least be honest with ourselves to that extent. So Nietzsche would have no interest in Marx's morality that says the moral thing is to bring about communism where oppression and exploitation are ended and people can treat each other equally and justly. Nietzsche says that's like being dead. Nietzsche thinks that life means exercising your power. That means taking, that means winning, that means exploiting. I don't know how you feel about all that, but that's certainly Nietzsche's ideas. Now, he makes a distinction in that genealogy of morals that I mentioned earlier between what he calls master morality, which is okay, he's okay with that, and slave morality, which he is very much opposed to. So think about this a little bit. What's master morality like? Well, those who practice master morality make distinctions between good and bad. What's good is what gives them more life. What's bad is what detracts from life, sucks the life out of them. Nietzsche thinks everybody should make judgments on that basis alone. What enhances, embellishes my life, that's good. What detracts or suppresses or sucks the life out of me, that's bad. But slave morality, and Nietzsche would more or less say all the moral theories we've talked about and will talk about in this course are, in a sense, slave moralities. He's very negative about that. They make a distinction between good acts and evil acts. Bad in the sense of not bad for my life, but just evil, wrong per se. And Nietzsche thinks that is generated by resentment. And it's a form of egalitarianism, which is life-denying, Nietzsche says. Now, think about that. Who invents morality for Nietzsche? The strong, healthy people or the weak, vulnerable people? He says, all right, think about a hawk and a field mouse. All right, what do hawks do? They catch and eat field mice, among other things. Uh, Grabbing up somebody for your own purposes, killing them if necessary, exploiting them, eating them, uh, for a hawk, that's good. That keeps the hawk alive. That's a good thing. And it's bad on the day that the mouse gets away or there aren't any mice in the field. That's bad. Good, finding the mice, killing the mouse, eating the mouse. Taking everything about the mouse for itself. That's master morality. But morality that says killing is bad, and hey, let's be fair and let's get along. Like, look, we're equals. You're one of God's creatures as a hawk. I'm one of God's creatures as a mouse. We all have an equal right to life. How dare you come and grab me up? Would it be fair if our roles were reversed? If I came and grabbed you up? No, it wouldn't. Well, Nietzsche says that's just resentment. Since a mouse can't beat up a hawk, the mouse, according to Nietzsche, invents morality in order to try to, to get the hawk, in effect, not to be a hawk. To get the hawk to give up doing exactly what hawks do, which is hunt down and eat field mice. So Nietzsche sees a lot of our moral theories like that. Weak people trying to impose their will on the strong. Now, that's Nietzsche. And that's kind of Nietzsche in a nutshell here. But there's an irony. There's a paradox about that. If morality is the morality of the weak, how come the weak won? Aren't the weak actually the strongest? Isn't there something strong about charity, love, sacrifice, care, concern, sharing? Isn't there actually something very, very strong, indeed overpowering in the end, of selfishness, exploitation, oppression, grabbing up? Nietzsche tries to say that all that exploitation and grabbing up is natural, that's life, and morality tries to suppress that and is, in a sense, uh, uh, ruining life by having morality. But I wonder if throughout all of culture there have always been moralities. Is it right to think, well, it's just the weak that have tricked the strong? And even if it is, then doesn't that make the weak the strong? Aren't they the ones who won? Haven't they made the better argument, the better case? So Nietzsche's a strong rhetorical philosopher and arguer, but it's important not to get too caught up in some of the things that he says here. Now, we'll come to the hardest part, especially if you happen to be a Christian, because you can't understand Nietzsche without understanding his anti-Christian views. And we need to talk about them because so much of what we call morality in society is tinged, at least, with some Christian ideas of sharing and caring and self-sacrifice and so forth. Okay, so here's Nietzsche again. With this, I come to a conclusion and pronounce my judgment. I condemn Christianity. I bring against the Christian church the most terrible of all accusations that an accuser has ever had in his mouth. It is, to me, the greatest of all imaginable corruptions. It seeks to work the ultimate corruption. Christianity does, the worst possible corruption. The Christian church has left nothing untouched by its depravity. It has turned every value into worthlessness, and every truth into a lie, and every integrity into baseness of soul. Let anyone dare speak to me of its humanitarian blessings. Huh! Its deepest necessities range it against any effort to abolish distress. It lives by distress. It creates distress to make itself immortal. For example, the worm of sin. It was the church that first enriched mankind with this misery, the equality of souls before God. This fraud, this pretext for people with grudges, of all the base-minded, this explosive concept ending in revolution, the modern idea and the notion of overthrowing the whole social order, this is Christian dynamite. In other words, the idea that we're all equal. Well, that was something that Karl Marx, who was no Christian, no religious person, well, he thought that too. In fact, many scholars say that Marxism, in a way, is just a Christian heresy. It's a twisted way of understanding the Christian ideal that we're all equal in God's sight. Nietzsche is not having any of that. It's dynamite that blows up reality, according to Nietzsche. The humanitarian blessings of Christianity, forsooth, to breed out of humanitas a self-contradiction, an art of self-pollution, a will to lie at any price, an aversion and contempt for all good and honest instincts. All this to me is the humanitarianism of Christianity. Parasitism as the only practice of the church, with its anemic and holy ideals, sucking all the blood, all the love, all the hope out of life, the beyond as the will to deny all reality. Like, don't worry what happens here, heaven is where the true reality is. Nietzsche says denial. The cross as the distinguishing mark of the most subterranean conspiracy ever heard of, against health, beauty, well-being, intellect, kindness of soul, against life itself. This eternal accusation against Christianity I shall write upon all walls, wherever walls are to be found. I have letters that even the blind will be able to see. I call Christianity the one great curse, the one great intrinsic depravity, the one great instinct of revenge, for which no means are venomous enough, or secret subterranean small enough. I call it the immortal blemish upon the human race. And mankind reckons time from this, the day when this fatality, we say 2012 AD. We reckon our time from the time that Christianity happened, from the first day of Christianity. Nietzsche says, forget that. Why not rather from the last day, from today maybe, the transvaluation of all values, where we stop using Christian values. Now, what Nietzsche's talking about there is nihilism. Nihilism. You might have heard this word, and he has a really funny take about this. We're studying concurrently with this St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, and we're asking the question of ourselves, well, if there's no God, is there any morality? Because people believe that if as Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist, said, if God is dead, all is permitted, we think, well, if anything goes, nothing matters, nothing has any real value or meaning. Well, that's the definition of nihilism, from the Latin word for nothing, nihil. If you get rid of the anchor, if you get rid of the touchstones, the signposts, anything goes, and nothing really matters, and you can't really make any judgments. That's nihilism. Now, Nietzsche flips that completely upside down, and he says, if you're a Christian, if you have religion, if you think the real values are out there in heaven where everybody's equal and everybody's the same, and you should never exploit, you should never exercise your will to power, Nietzsche says that's nihilism. It annihilates, turns into nothing, life for Nietzsche. Life is will to power. Will to power is taking, it's exploitation, it's overpowering, it's overcoming. And any morality that tells you to stop doing that is a morality that tells you to annihilate yourself, to don't be the living thing, desiring thing that you are. Now, again, I don't know exactly what all you want to make of this. Christians will probably have one view. People who aren't Christians maybe take this in a little different sense. Nietzsche was a funny guy about this. There's a story that's told of him. He meets a nice little old lady at a party one time, and she says, "Oh, Mr. Nietzsche, what do you do?" He says, "I'm a philosopher and writer." She says, "Oh, well, I'll have to get your books." And the story goes that Nietzsche, almost in tears, begged this dear little Christian lady never to read his books, that they weren't really meant for her. They weren't really meant for everybody. They were meant for a certain kind of people. So part of the problem is maybe you and I aren't the certain kind of people that Nietzsche means these books for, and we have to ask, well, what kind of people does he have in mind? Nietzsche died insane. Nietzsche stared into an abyss that, as he said, sometimes stared back into him. And he was a tormented guy for the last years of his life. But he sure gives you a ton to think about, and I hope that you will think about it. Here's one last thing to think about, and I'll end this presentation. Nietzsche has this idea of eternal recurrence, and I think it pertains to our questions about how is it best for us to be, and if that's what morality is, whether it's strong morality or weak morality, master or slave morality. Morality is about how it's best for us to be. So Nietzsche proposes a thought experiment, something you could do right. As soon as this presentation's over, you could try this yourself. Okay, it's from the book The Gay Science again, a little paragraphs called The Greatest Weight. Okay, here it is. So what if? What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you the following: this life as you now live it, and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it. But every pain, every joy, and every thought, and every sigh, and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider, even this moonlight between the trees, even this moment, and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. All right? You got the scenario? Your whole life, exactly as you have lived it to this point, will have to be lived again and again and again and again and again, and nothing in it will ever be different. It will be exactly the same over and over and over again. Now, suppose the demon told you that. Suppose that were true. Now, here Nietzsche asks you to ask yourself some questions. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? In other words, would that upset you? Would that make you mad? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him like this: demon, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine than what you just said to me. If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and every thing: do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight. Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself? Like, how much would you have to like yourself and to life to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal? All right, think about that. If it really turns out to be true that you have to live your life over and over and over and over again, then what do you do in the next moment? How is it best for you to be right now and in the next moment? Because to whatever choice you make next, now, whatever choice you make, you will have to repeat for eternity. Nietzsche calls that a great weight. Another way to look at it is think about what you're doing now. Is this the kind of thing you want to be doing forever and ever and ever and ever? Would that affect your choices in life if you thought you had to go through it again and again and again and again? What would that mean to you? Well, Nietzsche leaves us with that thought experiment, and I'll leave you with that thought experiment. But in summary, uh, and pay good attention to this, we're talking about natural law with Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle and Augustine in a way. And that means natural law suggests there's a designer, God, who put a design, or in other words, a nature, into all things, including human beings. So we have a human nature. So religion, this tie to God, the designer, or to this nature that's built in, uh, what Nietzsche might call a God substitute, human nature, that's the key for morality. Religion is the key to morality. If there's no God, then anything goes, and there's no morality, according to natural law theorists. The 19th century critics of natural law and generally uh, traditional moral theories altogether see it differently, but not the same as each other. Feuerbach thought that religious ideals are noble. They're a reflection of our own most important, valuable, noble characteristics, but we've alienated them from ourselves and placed them over there in an airtight compartment called religion. And what we need to do is regain that, recapture that. Religion for Feuerbach is the problem. If we get rid of religion, our actual life, our happiness will be easier to attain. Marx disagrees with Feuerbach. He does not see religion as the problem, he sees it kind of like medicine to treat the symptoms of a problem. The disease for him is capitalism and any other non-communist society which have a difference between those who own the means to production, the capitalists, and those who labor, or the proletariat. We need that medicine, Marx might argue, until we get rid of the disease. Going after the medicine is a roundabout way of going after the disease. Better to go after the economic situation and thus the political situation and thus the religious situation in that order. Go after the base and the superstructural change. Get out of capitalism, get into a just society, and no one will bother with these religious alienations ever again. So for both Feuerbach and Marx, there's something good in the ideals of religion. There is something good. And as we said, some have even said Marxism is a Christian kind of heresy. It's Christianity without Christ in a way. It's leading to an egalitarian where we're all equal, not in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of each other. Nietzsche, on the other hand, thinks religion, especially Christianity, is nihilistic. It's life-denying. Religious ideas are bad and unhealthy, and those have to be destroyed. Not so we can have an egalitarian, socially just system. He's against equality. He's against that understanding of social justice. What's just is what's good, and what's good is what's good for life, and life is about power. So Nietzsche thinks that morality, there's only one good kind of morality, and that's the morality of the master, the morality who can master himself or herself first of all. And all traditional moralities are a way of denying that will to power. So there's a presentation to think about as compared to your readings of Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, and St. Thomas Aquinas.